Hi everyone, my name is Bella Sowers and I am here to discuss a topic that is so important to me, as well as something that truly does, really resonate with me, and it's something that was important to me growing up and further into my adult life, which is the Latino community in the MLB and adversities and struggles that they have had to overcome to be able to be successful in such a high stakes position. Before we start, I do want to let you know I'm not alone on set today. I have a puppy with me. She's currently occupied, but if you hear barking or little paws pattering, that's just her doing her own little thing on set. But when we talk about something as huge as Major League Baseball, I think it's extremely important to give a little bit of the history behind it before we can take a deep dive into players that have then entered the league and had to face some of these adversities. So Major League Baseball is a professional baseball league here in the United States and Canada, and it is comprised now of 30 teams that are in two different leagues, the National and the American League. And this was formed in 1876 and 1901, and that is when the National League and American League really cemented their name into baseball. Many of these teams, you have to remember, started in Boston and New York and a lot more of the eastern side of the United States. However, they've slowly migrated to different cities over time. And one team that I think right now is being talked about is the Oakland Athletics, who have just played their last season down in Oakland, California, and they're going to be moving to Las Vegas. But the Oakland Athletics are extremely important because at one point in time they were the Philadelphia Athletics, and the Philadelphia Athletics actually had the first Latin American man in the league, and his name was Luis Castro, and he truly was an important figure in baseball, and unfortunately he did pass, and he passed on September 24th of 1941 at the age of 64 at Manhattan State Hospital. However, he left a very big impact in the league rather. He played second baseman in 1902 when the league had first started. However, he felt the need to hide his birthplace and where he came from. So he was a Colombian-born player, and it is very sad to think about that his fear was that he would be deported because his white teammates thought that he was less than they were. And truly that puts a pit in my stomach, and it's hard to talk about because my grandmother came when she was 15 from El Salvador, and she knew barely any English. Spanish is her first language. That's why I learned it growing up. And these players faced this huge adversity. He came knowing absolutely no English, and it's hard because you have to remember back then they didn't have just translators following these players around, and you can only wonder what they had to face behind dugout doors and what their teammates were saying about them, because the segregation movement with Martin Luther King hadn't happened yet, and people of color were really discriminated against in this country. And people, I feel as if, talk about blacks and whites being segregated, but there was this whole other group of people who were also heavily facing adversities, just not as known to the public eye. In an article written by a reporter, Anthony Castro-Vince, with the MLB organization, he talks about just how impactful Luis Castro was to the organization, and how he really did set the precedent for other players from other countries to work hard, and they had a road paved for them if they chose to put the time and the effort into coming into such a difficult league to join. And when we look at Latinx Studies, the Key Concepts by Frederick Aldama and Christopher Gonzalez, they talk about just how difficult the obstacles that Latinx has encountered, and one of them was language barrier and stereotypes of being colored people in sports. I think when we look at language barrier, that's probably the biggest thing that they face, because you can't openly just talk to reporters without having your translator nearby, which makes you dependent on another person that isn't yourself. Secondly, these players who are coming from other countries are signing contracts that aren't nearly for as much money as some players who are coming from the United States. Specifically, when I think about this, I'll use an example from my own team. We signed Comelo Deval from a Latin American country. I don't remember the exact one off the top of my head. And his contract was for a very small amount of money. It was less than $1 million. He didn't get a big signing bonus, if I'm remembering correctly. And he had to work his bottom off in the league to finally show that he deserved the respect to be a closer for the San Francisco Giants. Now more teams want in on him, but he was doing this all for a fraction of the cost. And if we look at someone like the newest prospect for the Baltimore Orioles, Jackson Merrill, he got almost $1 million signing deal with the Orioles. And I can't help but wonder if it was just because he was from the United States and not from a third world country. And don't get me wrong, that money probably goes wonders for these people, but it's almost disheartening to see how unfairly treated and respected and paid they are just because they aren't from America. And what's even sadder is that they think that is this huge chunk of change until you start comparing it to all of these other players. And we are going to talk about one who is in the league right now, who is actually asking for a ton of money, named Juan Soto of the New York Yankees. And he is also, Spanish is his first language. He faces that. He has translators by his side, but he is in works trying to negotiate new contracts with other teams because the Yankees are not willing to pay him a high dollar, although he is an amazing player. Baseball is not something that is new to Latin American players. They quite often play it amongst themselves as children, and eventually the best of the best start to move up, and we see that these marginalized groups are very passionate of what they are working towards, and they do soon get recognized for their work. It feels as if it takes so much longer for these players. And even in this book, the Latinx Studies, the Key Concepts, they touch on how, baseball initially refused to integrate people of color. And, Jackie Robinson really was able to step his foot in the door. And then, slowly other players. I think another huge one to talk about is a man from Puerto Rico. Roberto Clemente, he endured racist attitudes and actions, and he went to hell and back to do something that he truly loved. He persevered, and he became one of the absolute greatest players of all time. Let me tell you that this man has an award now named after him called the Roberto Clemente Award. And it truly just shows you how, it just shows you how unfortunate these men had it back then, but they have been able to set a new precedent in this, the society we live in. He was on the Pittsburgh Pirates, and he set records. He, unfortunately passed before they were able to indict him into the Hall of Fame. And it was so tragic. But the only way to honor him at that point was to have an award named after him that any player can receive every year. But wow, he won MVP. He had Gold Glove Awards. He was a World Series MVP. He had World Series titles. He was an all-star. He was a well-known man around the league. So I now want to touch on, the men back from 1902. They went through some racism. That's not a secret. It was hard for white people to accept people of color in their existence, which is really unfortunate because it almost feels like the society we are living in is reverting to those ways in the way we are handling, politics, day-to-day lives. But the sad thing is baseball should be an escape. Sports should be that escape for all of that to just not matter. And you just be able to root for your own team to win. And in an interview that I was watching on YouTube by La Vida Baseball, it interviewed tons of players and how their language barrier really does impact them more than I think we realize. I think it's easy to throw a translator and say the problem is now fixed. However, that does not mean the problem is fixed. Carlos Carrasco spoke about how he had to learn everything. He was put on a plane, brought to America, couldn't even order food, couldn't speak to the flight attendants. It was very difficult. Which is really sad because this is an organization that grows and picks its prospects from these different countries that don't necessarily have a ton of money in the world. So these men don't have translators to begin with, and they don't even get a translator on the plane with them. They are just kind of there, which is truly unfortunate. I also feel as if they have to pretend to be someone they're not because they're talking through another person. It's like a game of telephone. And so I almost can't help but wonder if the more progressive way to move towards a challenge and, tackle on this social issue of the language barrier is to have reporters who speak the same language as the players that they are choosing to interview, especially since it feels as if so many more people nowadays in the league's first language is no longer Spanish. But if you've ever been to a baseball game, I want to talk about some fan camaraderie and what it's like to be in the atmosphere of baseball players. So I grew up in San Francisco, California. So a lot of my memories are going to be coming from San Francisco Giants games. However, I now reside in Arizona, so Diamondback games have been a pretty normal occurrence for me. And one of my bucket list goals is to go to every single MLB stadium. And let me just tell you, depending on where you are, there are some fans who are very out of pocket in how they choose to, cheer on their team. And it's really sad. I think one instance that comes to mind for me personally would be when my boyfriend and I went to the San Diego's Padres game, and they were playing the New York Yankees, and a player that was once on their team had come back, but it was like one of their first games back home, and there were some very derogatory remarks from people who should be fans, who are once fans of this player, yelling out at him. For the sake of me not wanting to get in trouble, or more so because I don't feel comfortable saying them out loud, I just want to preface, think of the absolute most derogatory term you can use to call a man in his 30s who is from a different country, and that country is a Latin American country. This is what these white men were yelling. And quite honestly, that's sad, because they're already facing barriers. They're already trying to overcome, hardships, and they're trying to pursue a dream of theirs. But it's almost as if that gets ruined when we allow fans to just let loose because their team's losing, or they don't like a choice that managers make, and that dehumanizes people, and that's not okay. Unfortunately, as much as people would want to argue that white players or players who are black face the harassment from fans, it will never be as inappropriate as what I witnessed. And those stereotypes will never be as harmful from someone who literally came from nothing and is building everything that they have off of their one dream that they've had forever. Which is sad, because these players deserve the same respect we give white athletes, regardless of their statistics or their skin color. And that's all I have to say on dehumanizing and using derogatory terms towards players, because I absolutely do not think that's okay, and I never would want to condone or allow any of that, because that's just so sick and twisted. I think what a lot of people forget is everyone deep down is a human. Everybody deep down is a human, and they deserve the same respect, whether you agree or not. And just to end off, baseball really has impacted my life. I grew up in a home where I kind of felt imposter syndrome, which I'm sure a lot of these players do feel when they're first coming to the States for the first time. But if this reaches anybody, I want you to know that you at least make one person feel a part of a community, even if you don't see it right off the bat, which is something that I don't think, players get to hear all the time, is that someone really does resonate with them. So keep breaking the barriers, keep challenging the stereotypes, and never conform to something that will make you have to be a different version of yourself. It is okay to fight back and push the barriers, even if it's not the societal norm, and it is not something that has once ever happened. I think Roberto Clemente and Luis Castro are two great examples of that, as they were some of the first Latin American players in the league to push the barrier after Jackie Robinson paved the way for people of color to join the league. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed. I truly find baseball as something near and dear to my heart, and to be able to share that with everybody makes the biggest difference, and it really makes me happy.